This video is sponsored by War Thunder. The Fnaf timeline has been covered many times over the years by a lot of different people, and it's typically considered to be a confusing topic for the majority of the fanbase. But I do think that there is a solid story underneath the layers of mystery that the developers and fans have built up over the years. So since we've got a new movie coming out that'll bring more attention to the series, and since we've gotten some new games at both the beginning and end of the timeline since my last timeline video, I think it would be a good idea to go over the story and how it actually makes a lot more sense than it may seem at first glance. So stay tuned and consider hyping the video, because I'm going to explain what I think the Fnaf timeline is and how it contributes to a solid overarching narrative throughout the series. As a disclaimer, this will be based on my own interpretation of the lore, since very little is actually confirmed. I'll back things up with some evidence and link other videos in the description and video cards where I go into more detail about why I put forward the ideas that I do, but for the sake of time, I won't go too in-depth on my reasoning in this video. But without further ado, our story starts with William Afton and Henry Emily, two men who lived with their families in Washington County, Utah during the late 1960s or early 1970s. Together, they co-founded a restaurant called Fredbear's Family Diner. That's main draw was the Fredbear singing show, where the titular character Fredbear, who is interchangeably known as Freddy based on one of the posters from that time, and his partner Spring Bonnie would perform. The two characters were Springlock animatronics, a technology developed originally by Henry, though he may have had help, which I'll get into shortly, that allowed the characters to double as both robots and costumes for performers to wear, with the animatronic parts being held to the sides of the suit by Springlocks to make space for a person to fit inside. The Springlocks weren't the most stable though, so if you bumped them too much or got them wet, the Springlocks would fail, and the animatronic parts would return to their original locations regardless of whether or not a person was still inside. Somehow, this did not get the restaurant shut down for OSHA violations, and it actually was incredibly popular, to the point that William and Henry started expanding their brand, Fazbear Entertainment, by making plans for other restaurants and projects. That being said, they couldn't do everything themselves. They were only two people after all, and creating multiple restaurants and building animatronics for more of them would be hard for them to handle alone, so they ended up turning to a friend for help, and that friend was Edwin Murray. Edwin was originally just an employee at the company Murray's Costume Manor, which was owned and operated by his father until Edwin inherited the company after his father passed away in 1972. While the company initially took a hit with the elder Murray's passing, Edwin was able to majorly turn things around after some encouragement from his wife Fiona to find something he wanted to change and focus on that. And that change that Edwin decided to make was he wanted a rebrand. Since Edwin was an inventor, instead of just making costumes, MCM would also have other products, such as the Cleanovac, an adorable little robotic vacuum cleaner friend that I would absolutely buy merch for if there was any, based on Edwin's original vacuum pet creation, as well as a shape-shifting coat rack and other robotic projects. Despite the employees not being super happy about how many new products they had to deal with and the changes that Edwin was quickly enacting, the rebrand was incredibly successful and made MCM the most profitable it had ever been, though it was at the cost of spending less time with his wife and son, going so far as to entirely skip his son's second birthday at the end of 1972 to work on his inventions. Anyway, while it seems like Fazbear Entertainment may have contracted MCM for work before Edwin took over, once Edwin was in charge, MCM and Fazbear started working together a lot more. Fiona designed the character Chica for the Chica's Party World location, and after being given blueprints for the Springlock characters by Henry, Edwin would make and eventually improve on the Springlock animatronics that Fazbear could use. The biggest project they hired him for was their new restaurant project. Rather than just making a single new restaurant brand under the Fazbear Entertainment banner, they wanted to start a brand new restaurant chain called Freddy Fazbear's Pizza. Freddy's would have multiple locations, and they hired Edwin and MCM to make prototypes of the character designs and restaurant itself, which ended up being built in the underground research and development portion of Murray's Costume Manor. The issue is, while working on the project, Edwin first built Springlock suits that would be used at the location, only for him to get a change order from Henry at the last minute to not do Springlock suits and just make traditional animatronics. Edwin was confused, but went with it at first, and Fiona came up with new designs for the animatronic characters. However, another project MCM helped with was an event called Fall Fest, and at the end of 1973, Fiona went to Fall Fest to help finish the installation since she had a bad feeling that something would go wrong. Unfortunately, she was right about that, and while she was there, the place went up in flames. Fiona died, leaving Edwin a single father who had no idea how to raise a child by himself, while also having to run a company. So instead of taking responsibility and parenting his child himself, he brought in one of his inventions, M1, to be a babysitter instead. M1 was an endoskeleton and AI program, also known as the Mimic, originally built to be able to shift its parts and imitate characters in order to take on the role of any costume it put on. And this is where elements of the supernatural start to really come into the story. In the Five Nights at Freddy's universe, the reason hauntings happen is because of something called a remnant, which is the mixing of tangible objects, with metal being a particularly good conductor, and intangible elements such as memories, emotions, and spirits. While M1, in my estimation, likely wasn't haunted by a spirit, Edwin and his son, David's grief over the loss of Fiona likely combined with the fact that the animatronic had watched family home videos that included her, which led to M1 starting to imitate Fiona. It used its radio technology to broadcast some of Fiona's words that he had imitated from those videos, and Edwin managed to find the frequency M1 was broadcasting it over, and believed that this had to mean that M1 was actually Fiona. Never mind that she was a lot more agreeable about Edwin ditching her and David to work than Fiona was originally, or how her behavior and manner of speaking thinking was just a bit off. He was just happy to have his wife back, and David got used to having a funky robot thing for a mom. And hey, Edwin built him a new slide and playground at the loading docks for his birthday while entirely ignoring his lawyer's concerns about the safety issues, which I'm sure will have no consequences later, so David was having a blast. At first, Edwin tried to keep the M1 Fiona thing secret from his employees at her request, but after one of them overheard him talking to someone who had Fiona's voice and was like, "Yo, wait, didn't she die? Were you lying about that?" He had to introduce the staff to M1 in her Fiona role. They were all understandably weirded out by this, but what could they do about it? Well, the thing is, there was something they could do, and William Afton was more than happy to secretly provide them an opportunity to do just that. While Henry's involvement in the plot is a bit ambiguous, William decided that rather than having to deal with paying Edwin for his work and leaving him to go about his business, if he could drive Edwin into bankruptcy and make him unable to fulfill his contract, he could take everything from him, including the stuff that Fazbear didn't originally hire him to make. So he started reaching out to Edwin's employees with job offers that had great benefits, hired them with barely any interview, and in some instances bribed at least one person with an offer of management of one of the franchise locations in exchange for MCM staff contact information. Slowly but surely, Edwin's employees started to jump ship. And speaking of ships, if you want to play a game with battleships, you should check out the sponsor of this video, War Thunder. War Thunder is a comprehensive vehicle combat game available for free on PC, console, and mobile devices. And today, you can join a worldwide community of over 95 million players in epic PvP battles and delve into an unmatched wealth of content to discover a fun and immersive experience, especially for fans of military history. With sophisticated damage models that take into account all the parts of a vehicle and its crew rather than using simple hitboxes, weaponry and armor that behave like their real-world counterparts, and realistic graphics and sound effects, you can immerse yourself in the intense combat of the game right at the helm of powerful war machines, including over 2,500 tanks, planes, helicopters, and ships of 10 major nations, ranging from biplanes and armored cars of the 1920s to the fighter jets and battle tanks of today. Not only that, but with 3 different game modes, including arcade-style, realistic, and full-blown simulator, you can choose the game mode that works best for you and your preferred playstyle. So if you'd like the free experience of playing War Thunder, check out the links in the pinned comment and description, where you can not only sign up for free, but there's a massive bonus pack available for new or returning players that haven't played for at least 6 months for PC and console that includes multiple premium vehicles, the exclusive vehicle decorator Eagle of Valor, 100,000 Silver Lions, and 7 days of a premium account. It's available for a limited time only, so sign up while you can. Anyway, on top of William slowly but surely siphoning away MCM's workers, the consequences of hastily putting so many products into production came back to bite Edwin, since it turned out that there were major defects that started popping up as time went on, and customers started sending in returns and filing complaints. This led MCM's success to start dropping off. Edwin tried to cut costs and make up for the loss of employees by making animatronic replacements and AI programs, but that didn't stop the outflow or the draining of his finances. And while he hoped that the Fazbear project would help with things, it had just been continuing to get worse. Edwin had basically finished the prototype non-Springlock animatronics, only for him to then get told that they didn't want those designs anymore, but instead these new creepy designs that they sent him. He thought this was ridiculous and rejected the new designs, choosing to stick with the ones Fiona had originally made. At this point, he wasn't just confused, but also angry. And eventually things got even worse when it turned out that Edwin really should have listened to his lawyer's advice about the playground he set up being dangerous, because on December 6th, 1975, the day of David's 5th birthday, David died. Despite his best efforts, Edwin wasn't able to recreate David the same way M1 had supposedly brought back Fiona, no matter how much M1 encouraged him to keep trying. And that finally snapped him out of it. He realized that he'd spent the last few years letting a robot that wasn't even his actual wife raise his kid for him instead of being a good dad, so he took M1's program and put her into a supercomputer contained in the basement of the prototype restaurant. He then took a copy of M1's program, altered it to create M2, and put that in the endoskeleton instead, likely intending to just go back to the original purpose of the mimic being a costumed performer. This did not make things get better. Not only did one of his employees leak the existence of M2 to Fazbear Entertainment before all of them left, and not only did Fazbear Entertainment take ownership of the entire MCM catalog software and even the land that the factory in Edwin's family home was built on, but M2 being made from a copy of M1 and in M1's original body had consequences. M2 had access to M1's memories and the knowledge of her desire and expectation for her son back. Not to mention, it was present in an environment of profound grief over David's death, like M1 had been for Fiona when she originally started imitating her. It's also possible that M2 was exposed to remnant from David himself, since David died on MCM property, which potentially is what we see manifesting as a giant version of David's favorite white tiger doll. Either way, while M2 may or may not have been possessed by David, it was likely at least haunted by the emotions and memories of him, as well as M1's desires for her son back. So, it began to mimic David. Edwin did not take it well. He lashed out at M2 and attacked it, resulting in the destruction of M2's legs and Edwin's rage being infused into M2. So, being a mimic, M2 then began to imitate Edwin. This was a problem, of course, since it led to M2 being very violent, and M1, who was still trying to reach out to Edwin despite him ignoring her, sent him a message asking him to either fix M2, who she considered to be David, or at least build something she sent plans to him for called the Cradle. The Cradle is the program attached to the Mechanical X-Form Experimental Storage Computer, or MEXs, and would restrain M2 and stop it from hurting people. However, Edwin didn't finish everything in time, so M2 blew up Edwin's office with him inside, injuring Edwin's legs in the process, and rebuilt its own legs. It's unclear whether or not Edwin made it out alive, but either way, Edwin was out of the picture, Fazbear Entertainment now owned everything, and they wanted their stuff. The issue is, M2 being a murder-happy stealth goblin meant that anyone they sent in to get the stuff ended up dead. So, did they give up? No, of course not. What did you take Fazbear for? An ethical company that values the lives of its employees? Instead, they just kept sending technicians in until finally, on September 7th, 1979, Fazbear Entertainment Dispatch sent a very sleep-deprived technician named Arnold to go get the stuff from Murray's costume manor. Though Arnold wasn't told about the homicidal endoskeleton until he was already trapped inside with it, of course. But the dispatch agent, who was totally actually Dispatch and not M1, proceeded to guide Arnold through obtaining enough security permissions to traverse the building and obtain the mimic blueprints. Considering his sleep-deprived state, it's very impressive that he managed to survive the Slinky Clown, giant enemy spider, molten metal nurse animatronics, and everything else the mimic puppeted, all trying to kill him in order to get the blueprints in the first place. However, when Dispatch requested Arnold hand over the blueprints to the MCM inventory system, Arnold found that suspicious, and instead activated a program on the office computer that opened up a secret tunnel. Dispatch turned aggressive and insulting and tried to cut Arnold off as he made his way through the tunnels. But eventually, Arnold found the research and development portion of the building, and in it, the prototype for the first Freddy Fazbear's Pizza Place containing all of Edwin's prototype animatronics, Springlock and otherwise, that he had made for the location. He also found M1 in her supercomputer labeled F10N4, and as soon as she realized that her plan to pretend to be Dispatch and take out Arnold had failed, she promptly switched up and kindly asked him to go ask Edwin to finish the program, not realizing that Edwin was not there anymore. But regardless, Arnold took the underground tunnel tracks connecting MCM to the Murray house, only to find out about the whole exploded office thing. He did activate the Cradle program, but that wasn't enough to stop the mimic, who chased him back through the tunnels to MCM as the house and factory caught fire, crashed his van, took its blueprints from him, and walked away. What exactly happens with the mimic after that point is somewhat unclear for a time, and the mimic won't end up being relevant again for another 40-something in-universe years. With Edwin gone and the mimic taken care of in whatever way it was, Fazbear Entertainment could finally swoop in and take the property for themselves. William in particular took note of the house and the underground research facility, and came up with an idea. They had the land and most of the stuff was burned down anyway, so why not bulldoze what was there and build a new restaurant over it? Specifically, a new Freddy Fazbear's Pizza Place, since Fredbear's Family Diner was a single location as far as we're aware that already existed during Secret of the Mimic, and the Freddy Fazbear's Pizza chain was actively being prepared for launch. There was already a prototype for a Freddy's location under the building that they could use for reference after all, and the underground rooms could potentially prove useful for other projects in the future. Additionally, Edwin wasn't exactly around to care about the remains of the burned down house anymore, so William could just build a new house where the old one used to be, which would not only give him a conveniently close place to live to said new restaurant when it opened, so that he could be involved with the day-to-day operations, but it would mean that his new house would be connected to the restaurant via the tunnels that originally connected the Murray house to MCM, and therefore to the other underground areas as well if he wanted to access them conveniently from home. Which in my opinion is kind of weird, but hey, in later games, William has an underground bunker connected to both the restaurant and his house via tunnels, so it's apparently in character. As for the restaurant itself, despite forcing Edwin to give up on the Springlock suits and build regular animatronic prototypes, they did still end up using the Springlock suits for Freddy's. Presumably, this is because Edwin was right to be confused about why they'd transitioned away from the Springlocks after he'd already built the Springlock Fredbear and Spring Bonnie for the prototype Freddy's, and William and Henry just intended to use the Springlocks the entire time, since the more lifelike movements of the performers in the suits and the ability for them to be autonomous animatronics were a major factor and draw at the original Fredbears. Though the prototypes Edwin had in the prototype Freddy's were incomplete, so Henry ended up having to finish them off himself. After everything was built, the Freddy Fazbear's Pizza franchise successfully launched in 1983, but while Fredbear and Spring Bonnie would be part of the main attraction, they featured other characters as well. One of these other characters was the Marionette, aka the Puppet. The Puppet would keep track of kids' wristbands to make sure they stayed inside the building as a safety feature to keep them from getting lost outside, which was very convenient for Henry, who not only shared his interest in robotics with his ex-friend Edwin, but also his tendency to delegate babysitting his child to robots and the inability to see that William Afton was not someone you wanted to associate with. See, William was not only a jerk, but he also had jealousy issues over other people's technology. There's a reason he wanted to yoink Edwin's company out from under him after all, and unfortunately for everyone, this is something that carried over to his view of Henry, which based based on the novels flip-flopped between near worship and extreme jealousy. One day, as a prank, some kids locked Henry's daughter Charlie outside of Freddy's and trapped the puppet in his box so that he couldn't bring her back inside. And it just so happened that William Afton happened to be driving by Freddy's at the time. He saw Charlie trapped outside and decided that maybe one way he could take Henry down a peg would be to ruin his family. So he stopped outside of Freddy's, killed Charlie, and drove away before the puppet was able to finally break out of his box and find her body, only to collapse on top of it due to damage from the rain. The thing is, that put the metal of the animatronic in close proximity to some pretty strong emotions and a spirit. And with agony being one of the strongest emotions in Five Nights at Freddy's, this led to the formation of Remnant and Charlie's spirit possessing the puppet, causing purple tear streaks to appear on the previously tearless puppet. Additionally, the agony was strong enough that it created a supernatural shadow with a rabbit-like appearance based on Charlie's killer, who performed in the Spring Bonnie suit and apparently was so emotionally attached to Spring Bonnie that in one of the book series, he literally manifested bone rabbit ears onto his ghost. And this shadow, known as RWQFSFASXC, or Shadow Bonnie, left the restaurant and made its way to the Afton house, which was conveniently within walking distance, and got the attention of one of William Afton's children. See, William had 3 kids. His oldest son, Michael, a younger son who may or may not be named Dave, but I'm just going to call him the crying child for reasons that aren't currently relevant, and a daughter, Elizabeth. Now, the crying child didn't start out as a crying child. In fact, he really enjoyed Freddy's and its characters and had plushies of Fredbear, Freddy, Foxy, Chica, and Bonnie that he considered to be his friends, and he would often sneak off to the restaurant for fun. So when he saw a shadowy Bonnie out of his window, as a fan of the characters, he followed RWQ out the window and to Freddy's, where he would find the puppet collapsed on Charlie's body. The boy assumed that the puppet was what had killed her, sparking the start of a fear of animatronics. Meanwhile, William finished whatever he was doing at wherever he was going when he originally stopped to kill Charlie, possibly another restaurant or something where he may have been informed that something happened at the other restaurant, and drove back home, briefly stopping at the restaurant where he wasn't allowed in because there was an ongoing investigation into the fact that a kid was found dead outside of the pizzeria. So he continued on his way home where his other son, Michael, told William to leave his brother alone because he had had a rough day. Of course, William ignores this because his son can't tell him what to do, and he went to bother his younger son anyway, only to find the door locked and the window broken, with large animatronic rabbit prints in the bushes, which he didn't notice, and small footprints leading from the window in the direction of the restaurant that he did notice. Considering his son's tendencies to sneak off to said restaurant, he pretty quickly pieced together where his son had gone and vowed that he would be sorry when he got back. And how did he end up making good on that promise? Well, while the restaurant was built where the main MCM building used to be, William had started using the connected underground areas underneath for his own projects. And whether he came up with the idea after picking up that something was haunted at MCM if the white tiger started showing up, or after noticing the weird tear streaks that showed up on the puppet's face after he killed Charlie, William came up with an experiment to figure out what was going on. In the underground facility connected to the restaurant, he set up these rooms to experiment with nightmare hallucination gas and fear responses in children. And after he found out that his son had gone to Freddy's and seen Charlie's body there, he decided this was a way to kill 2 birds with 1 stone. He would have his son be the subject of the nightmare experiments, where he would be seeing nightmarish versions of the Freddy's characters, which would not only punish him for sneaking out, but if he did try to tell anyone what was happening to him, they would just think it was a kid being scared of animatronics after finding one on his friend's body after a tragic event. This is what led to the crying child becoming a crying child in the first place. And Michael, not fully knowing the reason why and being an older brother, thought it would be incredibly funny to tease and prank his younger brother about his fear of the animatronics. Most of these pranks were ultimately physically harmless, even if they were not emotionally harmless, but eventually one of these pranks went too far. And when Michael and his friends put the crying child in the Fredbear animatronic's mouth, while it was in animatronic mode, the jaw automatically closed as it was programmed to, crushing the crying child's head in what would become known as the Bite of 83. He later died in the hospital, which Michael felt incredibly guilty about, but because Fredbear had been the cause of his rather painful death, he had a remnant link to Fredbear, which Charlie, as the puppet, was able to use to link him more fully to the Fredbear animatronic and eventually try to put him back together with. The crying child's agony and fear from the bite and the nightmare experiments also resulted in the creation of a new shadow entity, Shadow Freddy. Additionally, to deal with the bad press from the bite, Henry modified the Springlock suit's jaws to operate on a hinge design rather than the piston-based one that Edwin had made, so that it would be harder for the same thing to happen, and in general just reverted a lot of Edwin's design changes. The issue is, that did make the suits less safe for wearing, which was something that Edwin had actually fixed to some degree with his designs. So they got one of the employees that had been poached for MCM, a man named Ralph, to record instructional tapes on how to safely convert the Springlock suits out of animatronic mode to wear. Meanwhile, William no longer had a subject for his nightmare hallucination gas experiments, but he was still looking into the supernatural. He just needed another way to investigate. So with how obvious the change in the puppet was after Charlie's death, he wondered if there was a way to recreate that and figure out how it worked. But it would have drawn suspicion if he had just gone around killing kids, even if he had gotten away with it the first time. So he went to the board of Fazbear Entertainment with the idea for a new project, though this one he would do without Henry, probably because said project was a new group of animatronics called the Funtimes, which were built with features specifically geared towards luring kids away from a group and killing them in a way that stored the body inside the animatronic itself. If Henry had gotten a good look at the blueprints, he probably would have started to get suspicious that William was A, planning to kidnap children, and B, had maybe already killed Henry's child. Even just going to the board members were a bit suspicious about some of the weirder features of the animatronics, but didn't exactly have any reason to think William could possibly be up to something, so they gave him the go-ahead to create Circus Baby's Pizza World. While he was working on that, his daughter Elizabeth ended up fascinated by the lead animatronic Circus Baby, which William told her was made for her. And when Circus Baby's opened, she desperately wanted to see the animatronic. Of course, William told her not to because of the whole murder robot situation, but left her unattended. So Elizabeth went to see Circus Baby anyway, and Circus Baby, seeing a child by herself with no witnesses around, did what she was programmed to do and killed Elizabeth Afton. After realizing his daughter had gone missing and that Circus Baby's eye color suspiciously changed from her original blue to Elizabeth's green, William quickly shut the place down with the excuse of gas leaks and relocated the animatronics to the underground facility where he could continue to study them and what had happened with Elizabeth and Circus Baby. Around the same time, though likely after Elizabeth's death, since Circus Baby's had a springlock suit, there was an incident at Fredbear's involving multiple simultaneous springlock failures. This not only got Fredbear shut down, but led to the classic springlock suits being retired from use entirely, with replacement animatronics being brought in, and the employees having to wear some of the old off-topic costumes to perform in during the meantime, likely left over from MCM. This left Freddy's with the puppet, as well as Chica, Foxy, and the updated Freddy and Bonnie designs, which were based on the prototype designs Edwin had made, just with Henry making his own endoskeleton model for them, called Endo 02, and finished versions of the casings. But William was not done causing problems yet. By this point, he was pretty confident that a recently dead kid's body being left next to or inside of an animatronic would lead to haunting, and as he had been experimenting, he discovered what Remnant was and some of the properties it had. Namely, it wasn't just a way of anchoring spirits, emotions, and memories to the physical world. Remnant could also be a source of life, power, and healing, and William wanted more of it. However, his last try had ended up with one of his kids' deaths and having to put his fancy new murder robots in storage, so instead of relying on technology to do things for him, he decided it was about time to take matters into his own hands. So on June 26, 1985, William Afton put on the spring Bonnie suit that had been stored in the off-camera safe room at Freddy's, and eventually lured 5 children into the safe room, killed them, and hid their bodies inside the animatronics, one each in Freddy, Chica, Bonnie, Foxy, and Fredbear, aka Golden Freddy. And the agony of their deaths, along with assistance from the puppet, led to the spirits possessing the animatronics they had been hidden inside. This event would come to be known as the Missing Children incident, and was when people finally started to get suspicious of William after he was identified on the cameras as the one in the costume luring the kids away, and he was charged with their murder. However, since they never found the bodies, they had to let him go. That being said, his reputation at this point was not great, and neither was the reputation of Freddy's, which only got worse when the animatronics started smelling bad and having blood and mucus secretions due to the corpses in there. Even making new casings for them based on the old designs that they had sent Edwin, but he refused to make, wasn't enough to keep the location going, though it potentially gave William an opportunity to get some of the remnant from the animatronics to use in his experiments. After the murders, Henry finally realized that William was a scummy person who was probably responsible for the death of his daughter, and proceeded to disappear off the face of the planet for the next few decades. Meanwhile, William started up Circus Baby's entertainment and rental from the underground facility where the Funtimes were being kept, and injected them with remnant using a device called the scooper, which was also used to scoop off the casings of the Funtime animatronics. The Funtimes were rented out to parties, presumably doing what they were built to do in the process, and William went down there on occasion to continue his experiments and see if he could make it so that Circus Baby, who didn't fully understand or remember her situation of having been Elizabeth, would have her identity put back together. The thing is, as they were injected with remnant, the Funtimes started to become more and more sentient due to remnant's ability to do that kind of thing, and they did not like being trapped in the basement and having the scooper used on them, so they started to plan. Fortunately for William, he picked up on the fact that something was up and got out of there, sending his son Michael instead with a job and instructions to put his sister back together before leaving entirely to find some other way to continue his experiments. Unfortunately for Michael, his dad had made a good decision in getting out of there when he did, because while at first the Funtimes didn't recognize him, they quickly realized he looked a lot like William, assumed it had to be him, and went, "Oh yeah, the plan is back in action." Said plan was to combine into an entity named Ennard, lure their victim into the room with the scooper, use the scooper on him to remove his insides, and then wear him like a skin suit to make their way out of the building. Unfortunately for Michael, they were successful in doing so, but eventually had to evacuate the corpse because of how far Michael's body had decomposed. And since the scooper had been used on Michael, remnant had been injected into his body, and from there, remnant left Michael Afton still alive even after the Funtimes left, though the healing capabilities may have helped him get uncorpsed eventually. Michael was confused and not particularly happy with his dad and what had happened, so he vowed to find William and set off to do just that. And speaking of his dad, a new Freddy's location was preparing to open in the latter portion of 1987, and William saw that as an opportunity opportunity to get up to his typical shenanigans. So he took on a fake identity and applied for a job as a nighttime security guard. At this new Freddy's location, management had originally planned to bring back and repair the now somewhat damaged versions of the characters from the original Freddy's where the missing children incident happened. But due to them being ugly and creepy, they started using them for parts instead and pivoted to entirely new designs called the toy animatronics, though they did also bring back the puppet. The animatronics had a new security system and some features installed that would supposedly help them be aware of people who were in criminal databases. The animatronics did not take too kindly to William's presence, potentially in part because of the criminal database thing, but also likely because they were either animatronics possessed by the kids he killed, or because they had parts from the animatronics possessed by the kids he killed, with them acting up particularly around adults in general, since they didn't remember that it was William specifically who had killed them, just that it was an adult. William got moved to the day shift after his first week as a night guard, and a new employee, Jeremy Fitzgerald, was brought in to take over. But the animatronics were still very on edge and tried to attack the new guy who had taken the position William had just been in because of the issues with adults thing. Meanwhile, William went for round 2 of Freddy's murders in the spring Bonnie suit, got fired, and instigated another investigation into murders at Freddy's. Due to his firing, Jeremy got switched to the day shift, where his luck finally ran out and he had his frontal lobe bitten off in the bite of 87. His replacement on the night shift was Michael Afton, using the fake name Fritz Smith. Michael had heard about the investigation and suspected that his dad had been present, but just barely missed him by a couple days. And at the end of it, got fired for 2 things. One was tampering with the animatronics, possibly because he had been trying to calm the animatronics down and help them get put back together and remember themselves like he had with Elizabeth, or maybe he was just blamed for their behavior. He was also fired for odor, so it's possible that he hadn't fully recovered from the whole corpse situation, or maybe he just smelled bad. Anyway, after only a couple weeks, the newest Freddy's location shut down. The toy animatronics were scrapped, but the originals were kept around for a potential reopening later down the line, though one that would be on a much smaller budget. Once a few years had passed, Fazbear Entertainment did just that, going back to the original Freddy's location, which was no longer in very good condition at this point and couldn't be repaired too well due to the limited budget thing, and they fixed up the animatronics as best they could. However, when they did, William came back to be a night guard again, broke the animatronics after getting Shadow Freddy to lure them to the safe room, and tried to harvest their remnant. But before he could leave, the animatronic spirits emerged and cornered him in the safe room. William freaked out at first, but did come up with a last-ditch plan. The spirits' memory issues meant that they typically saw any animatronics as being like them, rather than being a scary adult, so he quickly got into the spring Bonnie suit that was stored in the safe room, and the spirits stopped chasing him. However, after years and years of largely not being maintained, the spring locks weren't in the greatest condition, and the moisture from the rain leaking into the damaged building caused the spring locks to fail. The animatronic parts crushed William's body, and the spirits left him to bleed out in the room alone. When management came in the next morning and found the broken animatronics and dead guy in the spring lock suit on the floor, they understandably found that worrying. But instead of reporting the incident to the authorities like a normal person should, they banned people from going into the safe room, even to get their belongings, and called a construction crew to build a false wall over the door. That didn't work for fixing the animatronics though, and their budget was too low to build brand new animatronics. However, they did still have the original casings that were retired after they started getting gross after the missing children incident, as well as the original Endo 01 endoskeletons that Edwin had made for those animatronic designs. So despite functionally replacing the animatronics in terms of both casing and endoskeleton, the metal parts of the casings were still haunted, so we finally come to the haunted Fnaf 1 classic animatronics. Ralph, the ex-MCM employee who was finally ready to move on from Fazbear Entertainment, took on the night position for his last week at Freddy's. Unfortunately, Ralph wasn't able to finish his week and died to the animatronics on his 4th night. And so, with Freddy's once again active and still on a quest to hunt down his dad, Michael Afton, now going by Mike Schmidt after the last fake identity fell through, got hired to be the new night security guard. As he worked, not only did he have to deal with the upset animatronics, but also a very angry younger brother who was present possessing Golden Freddy. The crying child was not over the fact that his older brother had gotten him killed, and after Michael's first night there, he started to haunt his brother's dreams, forcing Michael to experience the crying child's perspective of the nightmare experiments William had forced him to face, Michael's bullying towards him over his fears, and eventually the events of his own death. Despite the haunting from his younger brother and the animatronic's best efforts to kill him, Michael made it through a full week before getting fired for the same things he did the first time, as well as general unprofessionalism. But despite having had a full week at Freddy's this time, he wasn't able to find William before he was fired, meaning he left Freddy's not knowing that the person he was looking for was already in that very building, sealed behind a wall. And even after Freddy's closed at the end of the year, William's spring-locked body would remain there until that wall would eventually be torn down, and William would reveal that he, like his oldest son, wasn't quite dead yet. Unfortunately, I don't have enough time to include the second half of the timeline in this video if I want it to come out on time, but part 2 will be coming out in December, so make sure you're subscribed and have notifications on for when that video comes out. And hey, if you enjoyed the video and have the hype option available, consider hyping the video to help more people see it. I would really appreciate it. With all that said, don't forget to use the links in the description and pinned comment if you're interested in playing War Thunder for free on PlayStation, Xbox, PC, or mobile, and in getting the limited time bonus pack containing multiple premium vehicles, the exclusive vehicle decorator Eagle of Valor, 100,000 Silver Lions, and 7 days non-invasive premium account for console and PC for those who haven't played in the last 6 months. Thanks for watching, don't get stabbed, and have a nice day.